Ravi,
Sir,
please start. Yes.
okay, sir. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, Ravi.
Ravi,
Okay,
please.
Ravi. Okay, sir. Okay, Ravi. Come on. Okay, sir. Okay, Ravi. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the lecture series. Today, lecture 48th lecture. Today, our topic is Mandal Commission and Social Justice by Professor Adapa Satyanarayana, former head and Department of History, Osmania University, Hyderabad, and he also CDS governing body member. So, I will give brief introduction about sir. Adapa Satyanarayana is a retired professor of history, Osmania University, Hyderabad, India. He obtained DPhil degree in South Asian history from Heidelberg University, Germany. He joined the Osmania University as a assistant professor of history in 1984 and served for about 30 years. During his academic career, Adapa published more than 60 research articles and 10 books. His area of specialization is the socio-economic history of modern India, with a focus on subaltern history. For his academic achievements, Professor Satyanarayana was awarded postdoctoral fellowship and visiting professorships by many universities in India and foreign countries. Uh, he also uh, for his he is a visiting professor India, studied chair Martin Luther University, Hell, Germany, 2007, March 2018. Visiting fellow Kashanta for Southeast Asia Studies, Toyota University, Japan. With Thyssen Visiting Fellowship, Franke Foundation of Martin Luther University, Hella, Germany. Like this, he has so many universities visiting professor in India also. So, with a brief introduction, under him, I think 15 MPhil dissertations completed and 14 PhD degrees completed. Now, I think under him, 6 PhD scholars are working with him as Dr. Fellow. With this brief introduction, I would like to call Professor Adapa Satyanarayana, sir. Please give your lecture. Thank you, sir. Okay, Ravi, thank you for your good words about my career. I am thankful to Malape Lakshmaya for giving this opportunity to me to talk about Mandal Commission and social justice. I think given the framework of analysis, Lakshmaya Garu has always been encouraging critical analysis and deep understanding of the subject matter. I agreed to talk about Mandal Commission and the social justice because today it is the need of the hour. The disadvantaged groups, the backward castes, the Dalits, and other vulnerable groups are striving very hard to achieve
social and economic justice within the framework of the Indian Constitution. Though the levels of people below the poverty line has been declining in recent times, but yet a reasonably noticeable proportion of the population live under the abject conditions, suffering with poverty, malnutrition, and discriminations of all sorts. So actually, the Indian Constitution upholds the principles of secularism, humanism, and social justice. The founding fathers, in particular, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, enshrined these principles in the Constitution, knowing fully well how the constitutional provisions will help in the empowerment of the weaker sections and the downtrodden communities. So the Indian governments, during the post-independence period, have sought to uphold these principles and implement certain measures. And a number of commissions have also been appointed during the post-independence era. The Kaka Kalelkar Commission was the first, so to speak, to address these issues in the post-independence era. In fact, the caste-based reservations, in fact, go back to the pre-independence era. In fact, it was the British official Hunter and Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, in fact, conceived the idea of caste-based reservations. Jyotiba Phule, in particular, in fact, critically examined the caste system. What Karl Marx has done for the class analysis, I think Jyotiba Phule, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, has done for the caste-specific situation in the Indian subcontinent. And he has also come out with certain proposals for uplifting the downtrodden communities. And one of the measures that he conceived, quite notably, was education. The formal education and literacy was denied to the vast majority of the Dalit Bhojans in this country. Under the injunctions of the Manodharma Shastra, for centuries, the Dalit Bhojan people were kept outside the formal systems of knowledge. While the Gurukula systems of education in the traditional Hindu India have catered to the needs of the Dijas and other upper castes, while they left out the vast majority of the Dalit Bhojan communities. So therefore, Jyotiba Phule was quite specific about the educational empowerment of the Bhojans, of Dalit Bhojans, broadly speaking. And his minute to the Hunter Commission clearly brought out the value of education. Because under the Peshwa rule and the general Hindu or caste system, the Dalit Bhojans were excluded quite, consciously by the Brahmanical forces. And therefore, Jyotiba Phule sought to liberate, emancipate these communities through their educational empowerment. So therefore, he played a very significant role in sensitizing the British colonial rule about the need to start educational institutions for the benefit of the education of the Dalit Bhojan communities. Because, as I said, the Gurukula system of education, by and large, excluded them. And also, as far as the other non-Hindu groups are concerned, the Muslims, the madrasa system was there, but the madrasa system was also restricted to the upper class, upper echelons of the Muslim society. So therefore, caste has been a crucial element in the growth of literacy and in providing access to the formal educational institutions. So therefore, in the traditional India, the educational and employment opportunities were by and large, dominated by the upper class and upper classes. And therefore, there was need to empower, these communities. And a number of, as I said, commissions were appointed to look into the educational backwardness, the reasons for the exclusion of the socially and economically, educationally and educationally, excluded communities. So therefore, in the post-independence era, the important landmark was in fact, came in the form of the Mandal Commission. It was also known as the Socially and Educational Backward Classes Commission, which was established in 1979 by the Janata Party government under the Prime Minister of Morarji Desai, with a mandate to identify the social and educational backward classes of India. And this is very important, to identify the socially and educationally backward classes of India. Because backwardness in terms of educational empowerment, backwardness in terms of exclusion of the formal, institutions of learning was a very crucial factor. And the educational, the social and educationally backward commission was headed by BP Mandal, an Indian member of parliament, to consider the question of reservations for people to address caste discrimination and to use 11 social, economic, and educational indicators to determine backwardness. Because this is very, very tricky question as to how to define backwardness in an inclusive sense. Backwardness in social system, in educational system, in economic system, and in political system. And therefore, it was BP Mandal who, in fact, attempted to classify the backward classes and to identify what you call the reasons and the factors that contributed for the backwardness of these communities. And in fact, in 1980, based on its rationale that OBCs, the other backward communities, identified on the basis of caste, social, economic indicators, made up of 52% of the Indian population. And therefore, the commission recommended that members of OBCs be granted reservations to 27% of jobs under central government and public sector undertakings and seats in the higher educational institutions, thus making the total number of reservations for SCs, STs, OBCs about 50%, because that is the constitutional mandate that the reservation all put together should not exceed 50%. So therefore, the Mandal Commission has made elaborate, analysis. It has collected, data from different sources and come to a rational, conclusion of establishing that 52% of the Indian population belongs to the backward class. communities or backward classes, as I said. And this is a very important factor because, more than 50% of the people of Indian society are suffering from these, what you call, maladies of these discriminations. So the Mandal Commission report was completed, in fact, in 1980. And the VP Singh government, for the first time, declared its intention to implement the report in 1990. This was a very important, landmark decision of the government because already the reservations existed for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and they constitute about 22% or so, and the other OBCs included, and the reservation comes up to 49.5%. So that is the constitutional ceiling. It did not exceed the constitutional ceiling of 50%. Though the commission has made its recommendations, and the implementation was a very, very difficult process. In fact, for about a decade, the governments were indeterminate. From 1980 when it submitted its report till about 1990s, when VP Singh government declared its intention to implement the report. I think time has passed out because no government was willing to take the risks of backlash from the non-reserved communities and castes, particularly the upper caste. And but although there was a lot of criticism against the Mandal Commission, and of course VP Singh was very much targeted by the upper caste elements in terms of the anti-Mandal hesitations. So I'll speak a little about it later, but now the historic significance of the Mandal Commission has to be understood in terms of the functioning of the caste system and the relationship between caste and literacy, caste and education, caste and access to educational and employment opportunities. Because in India, it is generally said that property means land. Landed property, education, and employment contribute for the social well-being of communities. Okay, those communities which are historically took advantages of the system, monopolized these sectors. If you looked at the statistical kind of a data that is available, as in the case of South India, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh put together, we see a close a kind of a combination exists between the caste system and the rate of literacy and the economic and social empowerment. Historically, the Dvijas, meaning the Brahmin, in the case of North India, UP, Bihar, etc., the Brahmin, Bhumiyar, Rajput communities are considered the so-called Dvijas. In fact, in the Indo-Gangetic Valley, in the Indo-Gangetic belt, Ganga Sindhu Maidanam called, these Dvijas were well entrenched in the social and economic hierarchy. In a way, South India is a little bit different in the sense the way the Varna system evolved and the caste system got rigidified. In the Indo-Gangetic Valley, consisting of the states of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and parts of Madhya Pradesh and Bengal, the dominance of the Dvijas is complete. even after the colonial rule was established, the traditional social system continued without much kind of a break, meaning that the Dvija communities maintained their hold, their dominance in the secular realm, meaning public education, employment opportunities that were provided by the colonial state. Although the colonial state introduced certain principles which negated the spirit of caste. And for instance, theoretically speaking, the educational institutions are opened up to all sections of people, irrespective of caste, community, gender discrimination. So the government schools are the government-aided schools. There is no discrimination based on caste, community, and other, other considerations. But yet, of course, we know that under colonialism, the Brahmins and the Dvijas monopolized the knowledge systems, and therefore they disproportionately benefited by the opportunities of education and employment opened up by the colonial state with all the limitations. Of course, the Macaulay Minute has all its limitations. But, the vast majority of the Dalit Bhojans were left behind, even under the Macaulay Minute, under the Macaulay system of education. Because, as I said, the caste system, the position of the caste in the social hierarchy determines, the access to education. So therefore, historically, the educational and economic backwardness coincided with the social structure. That is to say, access to land, education, and employment was monopolized by the upper caste. And therefore, it has its implications. And particularly, since we are talking about Mandal Commission, the Mandal Commission study has indicated very important aspects of the caste system. Because I think there is a kind of a difference in terms of how the caste system evolved and functioned in the Indo-Gangetic Valley and in the south of the Vindhyas. The classical Varna system flourished in the Indo-Gangetic Valley much more than in the region south of the Vindhyas, the Deccan region, so to speak, which consists of the 4 or 5 southern states. I think it's important to understand how the Indo-Gangetic Valley, the Varna Jati system flourished, which in fact reinforced the dominance of the upper caste, namely the Dvija caste, I should say. The Sudras, the Jats, Ahits, and other so-called untouchable communities remained in the periphery, and their dominance was so complete. Therefore, when the Mandal Commission recommendations were sought to be implemented, there is so much of opposition by the Dvijas, by the upper caste in the Indo-Gangetic Valley, in the Indo-Gangetic region, than in South India. By and large, the South historically has certain, advantages in the sense that in the Deccan region, the Varna ideology and the Brahmanical system did not take such deep roots as it took in North India. I think this I always say this, because given the ecological, geographical, and communitarian system that flourished in the south, there was not much of a a force which in fact maintained this Varna Jati system so rigidly as it existed in the Indo-Gangetic Valley. For the simple reason, here the non-Brahmin communities, the Dalit Bhojans, broadly speaking, had maintained their identity and their self definition quite successfully by resisting these Brahmanical forces. And when I say this, I have the spread of Buddhism and Jainism in the south, in the Deccan. In fact, during the lifetime of Buddha itself, Buddhism flourished in this region, what we call today the Deccan, south of the Vindhyas, because of the non-Hinduistic religious traditions, namely Jainism, Buddhism, Sramanism, what Romila Thapar calls Sramanism, that is the people's culture, the people's ideology, people's assertion, in terms of these caste community groups in the Deccan maintained their what you call autonomy, in spite of the fact that Brahmanical ideology and Varna system prevailed. So therefore, that has a great impact, in the later stages. When during the British colonial rule, the forces of modernity impacted very much in the south. Here, in the 19th century, the non-Brahmin movement was quite significant, not only in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, also in Andhra and Telangana regions. There was quite a significant what you call non-Brahmanical traditions, non-Brahmanical ideology, and non-Brahmin movement flourished, wherein the non-Jija castes and communities maintained, their autonomy. And in fact, there were long-established traditions of protest by the Dalit Bahujan communities. If we just take the ancient past, these Sramanas, these Jains, Buddhists, and other heterogeneous and dissent groups flourished quite autonomously in this region, and therefore we find the resistance to this to the Brahmanical ideology quite well established in this region, and of course the way that the Saraka and Samaka during the Kakatiya regime, and Virnari, Chakala Ailama in the modern period, Kumram Bhim during the Telangana armed struggle, are the illustrations of the fact that the Dalit Bahujans in this region resisted the hegemony and the domination of the upper caste and upper caste and the communities. So therefore, there is a strong tradition of dissent and protest in this region, south of the Deccan, as compared to the Indo-Gangetic Valley, because I always maintain, this distinction between the Aryavarta and the Dakshinapad. So the Dakshinapad was, though Aryan ideology and Vedic ideology came and flourished in this region, it did not completely succeed in terms of negating the dissent and protest culture that existed. Historically, as I said, right from the Shatavahana period, this Asmaka Janapada, largely coincides with the Telangana region and coastal Andhra. The Asmaka region maintained its autonomy. So therefore, in the modern period, with the advent of the British colonial rule, the modern education played a significant role. Here I should say the long-established tradition of protest and dissent, in fact, continued in the modern period with the access to education by the Dalit Bahujan communities. With all the limitations, during the colonial period in Telangana under the Nizam, the educational measures, in fact, empowered the Dalit Bahujan communities. And the clear case of Bhagyareddy Verma, the foremost social reformer of the Dalit Bahujan communities in this part of the country. Long before Ambedkar, I should say that Bhagyareddy Verma started the social reform movement among the Dalits uh, by establishing the, associations in 1906. The Jaganmitra Mandali was one of the foremost, organizations that has come about. So therefore, in this region, in the Deccan, broadly speaking, the Varna ideology and the Varna system, uh, though flourished, it did not go unchallenged, or it did not go uncontested. So therefore, dissent, protest, and conformity or confirmation to the existing system uh, continued, uh, in this region. This dialectic of what you call uh, dominance and resistance was a unique feature of this region of the Deccan region. So therefore, in the modern period, when the Constitution of India guaranteed access to all castes and communities, irrespective of caste, community, and gender, the portals of educational institutions were thrown open. And therefore, the educated intellectuals, the educated middle class, so to speak, played a significant role in the awareness of the Dalit Bahujan communities, and the non-Brahmin movements, the non-Brahmin ideology, and the long-established tradition of dissent culture amongst the Dalit Bahujan communities. In fact, played a very significant role in democratizing the civil society. Long before the constitution has come into existence. And therefore, it is in this context that we have to understand the Mandal Commission and its impact, in terms of uh, propagating the concept of social justice and upliftment or liberation of the Dalit Bahujan communities from the clutches of Brahmanical ideology. The unique contribution of Mandal Commission lies in the fact that it sought to empower the OBCs, in terms of providing access to education and employment. So therefore, the reservation here assumes a kind of a pivotal role in not only democratizing the system, but also empowering the socially and educationally backward communities. And the other important significant aspect of the Mandal Commission is that it promoted the constitution of self-identity amongst the OBCs. I think for the first time in India, across the regions, with all the differentiation, with all the differences, broadly, the non-Brahminical communities or the so-called other backward classes for the first time have come together to defend their rights, to articulate their demands in terms of access to education and employment. Because as we all know, in any society, social mobility is possible through property, means land and other resources. Land, education, knowledge system, and employment. So historically, the upper caste, mainly the Dvijas, have monopolized, these spheres, spheres of knowledge, employment, and therefore they got benefited, whatever may be the political system, whether it is the Hindu or Rajas or the Muslim rulers and the British colonial rulers. Ultimately, they were the beneficiaries because they had a long established tradition, behind them. Therefore, they took the advantages, the opportunities provided by the colonial state, and you know, disproportionately, in fact, had access. And therefore, the inequalities that existed, in the educational and employment sphere, sought to be addressed by the Mandal Commission. And therefore, in this sense, the Mandal Commission report is a great historical document in terms of empowering the vast majority of the backward communities. Because unlike the Dalits and scheduled tribes, the OBCs was a heterogeneous group, heterogeneous community, with all local variations, with all differences in terms of professions, occupations, and community formations. In spite of that, for the first time, the people belonging to this OBC category have realized that those historical wrongs committed by the system could be rectified in accessing the formal knowledge systems, in terms of literacy and education and employment opportunities. Because for the vast majority of the Dalit Bahujan communities, access to land was also very much limited, because the land occupation, land ownership, and social hierarchy coincided so much that upper the community, larger the access to economic resources, namely land, education, and employment. So therefore, there is a close correspondence between the social hierarchy and the land holding pattern. So therefore, under colonial rule, the education system, with all the limitations, in fact, education was made free, and accessibility was provided to communities and castes hitherto neglected by the traditional education system of Gurukulas and the madrasa. So therefore, the other backward communities had the benefit of, let us say, both the colonial system of education and the post-independent educational systems. Therefore, the Mandal Commission has clearly provided a kind of a platform to articulate the OBC's consciousness and identity and self-assertion. And in this sense, Mandal Commission is not simply a constitutional provision, so to speak, but it was also a socially charged, system of empowering the other backward classes, because constitutional provisions already were enshrined for the benefit of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And a reservation was accordingly provided, 15 and 7.5 or so. So around 22% of the positions posts were reserved for these communities, SCs and STs, and also educational employment opportunities were also provided. But somehow the other backward castes left behind, in the sense that there were not many constitutional provisions, and therefore the other backward caste communities strove very hard, and Mandal Commission recommendation has given them a kind of a identity to articulate their grievances and come together, irrespective of all those differences that existed in terms of region, caste, and class. So the other important aspect to understand Mandal Commission, as I said, historically, the the entrenchment of the Brahmanical upper castes disadvantaged uh, the other backward classes, and therefore Mandal Commission, in fact, provided the rationale for the OBC organizations and coming together of the OBCs for realizing their constitutional and other rights. And Mandal Commission focused mainly on education and employment aspects more than anything else, because it realized, Mandal Commission realized that there is a, as I said, close correspondence between access to education and literacy and the social hierarchy. And the higher the position, social position, the better the education and employment opportunities. And in this sense, the Mandal Commission for the first time, of course, there were earlier commissions were there, for example, Kaka Commission was there, but the Kaka Commission could not be implemented. It could not be, in fact, taken note of by the ruling class, and therefore they simply ignored the recommendations, because at that time, so to speak, the existing governments, equality at that time, did not take notice of the aspirations of the OBCs, and the OBCs were also so disorganized, and they are not unified, in terms of their articulating their rights and their and demands for their placement in the educational and employment section. So it is in that sense, important that Mandal Commission, for the first time, has given rise to the aspirations of the backward classes, and the impact of the Mandal Commission can also be understood in terms of the opposition that it generated. The anti-Mandal agitation, which was largely spearheaded by the upper caste students and upper caste, middle class. That shows their mindset, their psyche, that they do not want to have, they do not want the backward classes to have any access to the privileges that they accrue to them. So they don't want to lose their privileges. Therefore, the ferocity, the way the anti-Mandal hesitation spearheaded by the upper caste, particularly in the North India and in the states of Gujarat and so on, clearly indicates the psyche, the ideology of caste, and the rationale for the caste system. In the name of merit, for example, the upper caste elites wanted to support the aspirations of the OBCs, and it's against the organized opposition from the upper caste elites. The Mandal movement has to be undertaken, because the forces were weak. The opposition forces were so united. And as English lecturer, I still do remember when I entered into the portals of Osmania University Arts College. The upper caste children, upper caste students, were so arrogant and so self-assertive. They in fact treated the other backward communities, simply as flies. They had utter contempt, for their hesitation or for their aspirations. So that shows the caste psyche that is at work. So therefore, Mandal Commission and its report is historic, in the sense that it, for the first time, in fact, given a kind of an instrument to articulate their demands. So the OBCs were united. The judicial reviews have also taken place. Of course, the Supreme Court has laid down the guidelines. Also, although 52% of the people are identified as backward communities, the Mandal Commission and with the intervention of the judiciary restricted it to 27%. So 27% reservation was accepted by the Supreme Court judgment, and therefore that has become a kind of a benchmark. But even then, with all the limitations, from about let us say 1990s, with the positive understanding of the Prime Minister at that time, VP Singh, and subsequent governments, it was agreed. The Supreme Court upheld that the 27% reservation for the OBCs, keeping in view the mandate that reservations should not exceed 50%. So therefore, the other backward classes were empowered, so to speak, in terms of these recommendations. And with all the limitations, I should say that the post-Mandal hesitation has in fact provided an opportunity for these castes and communities to have access to the portals of higher education. The IITs and IIMs and the higher education institutions were a preserve of the upper caste, mainly the Dvijas. If you take North India, Aryavata as a whole, you could see quite clearly how the Dvija communities entrenched and dominated these institutions. South is a little different, in the sense that we have a long established tradition of the non-Brahmin articulation, non-Brahmin movements, and of course, even statistically speaking, the Brahmin community was quite a minority. It did not exceed, more than 5 to 10% of the population. But whereas in the Indo-Gangetic Valley, in the Indo-Gangetic belt, the Brahmins, the Dvijas, constituted about 20% of the population, or even more in certain regions. So therefore, the opposition to Mandal was so virulent, was so strong, and was so casteist, I should say, in the sense of justifying and upholding, in the name of merit, the upper caste domination of the educational institutions and employment opportunities. So therefore, historically speaking, this entrenchment of the upper caste sought to be debunked by the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. The Constitution of Mandal Commission itself was a historic step, and the reservations, the 27% that was accepted, and even by the Supreme Court, has for the first time thrown open the elite institutions, such as the Indian Institute of Technologies, Indian Institute of Science, and the National Institutes of Technology, and other higher educational institutions. And thus we can see the Mandal Commission report sort of engineering was a sort of instrumental, was an instrument in social engineering. Because given the caste system, it was not possible. Social engineering was not possible. Social mobility was not possible. The societal transformation in terms of the access by the weaker sectors to education and employment opportunities was not possible. It was restricted. The caste system has a mechanism. In fact, the caste system itself is a kind of a reservation system which was enjoyed by the upper castes and the upper classes historically for centuries, I should say. So there was that undeclared reservation system that worked within the context of the caste system disproportionately benefited the upper caste. And of course, from time to time, these upper caste dominance was challenged, by the social reformers. As I already mentioned, Jyotiba Phule was the forerunner, was the foremost social reformer who who worked towards the empowerment of the Dalit Bhojans. And for the first time, Jyotiba Phule submitted this memorandum on education of the Dalit Bhojans to the British government. And that historical document, in fact, provides several insights into the way the caste system functions, particularly in the case of Maharashtra, how under the Peshwa rule, the education, employment, and knowledge systems were overwhelmingly dominated by the Brahmins, and therefore he talked about empowerment through education system, or education only, because he knew that land and other assets were monopolized by the upper caste. Therefore, the Dalit Bhojans had no access, and they have no what you call recognition. Their social respectability was not, identified with landed property or with the educational achievement. So, therefore, I think the foremost social reformer who sought to create an education system that will empower and ultimately lead to the liberation of the Dalit Bhojans. And Jyotiba Phule was quite critical in analyzing how the Gurukula system of education under the Hindus, including the Peshwas, was biased, was partisan, which was consciously empowered the upper caste while neglecting the Dalit Bhojans. So, given this historical background, the Mandal Commission recommendations are a very important historic, they have historic significance, in the sense consciously providing certain percentage of seats in educational institutions, including the higher education, elite educational institutions, and employment opportunities in the public sector. Though the public sector is limited, the Mandal Commission has laid great emphasis on providing these opportunities. The colonial, the traditional caste system, in a way, was reinforced during the colonial system. In fact, the colonial system of education, the colonial system of employment opportunities, in fact, disproportionately benefited the upper caste. Therefore, in fact, the colonial system reinforced the caste system in a way by maintaining the dominance of the upper caste. While, of course, the colonial measures of the colonial government, in terms of free and fair access to the educational institutions and empowering the Dalit communities, in terms of literacy, have played a significant role. Of course, Ambedkar could not have been possible, without the British education system, and therefore, the social reformers, notably Jyotiba Phule, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, and Baba Saheb Ambedkar, emphasized the need to empower the Dalit Bhojan communities educationally and in terms of employment opportunities. So they played quite a bit of emphasis on education and employment. Not so much, in terms of structural changes in land, so for example, like land reform. Though it was desirable, but it was not possible, and given the conditions that existed. So therefore, the best way to empower these disadvantaged groups was through access to formal education. So therefore, Mandal Commission, in fact, ultimately embodies these principles of social justice, social equity, and why the Mandal Commission provoked the upper caste elites, precisely because they did not want to share any of their privileges that accrued to them in a disproportionate manner. And that was the crux of the matter. Why the Mandal Commission became so violent? Why the upper caste boys and girls took to the streets, and some of them committed suicide, self-immolation, which was not in a way warranted, so to speak. But the prejudice, the caste psyche, the ideology of caste was so entrenched, and it was so socialized by the upper caste families that they did not want any share in their privileges, in their powers. Therefore, they opposed tooth and nail. The anti-Mandal hesitations that took place, particularly in North India, in Bengal, in Bihar, UP, Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, etc., shows how intolerant were the upper caste elites were towards the legitimate democratic, demands of the Dalit projects. And in that sense, the Mandal Commission, adopted subtle measures, and in fact, it has taken so many variables into consideration to come to certain conclusions. And the greatness of the Mandal Commission lies in the fact that it has categorically stated the reasons for reservation for the OBCs. And though, of course, it calculated 52% of the population belonged to the OBC, but given the constitutional constraints and the judicial review, ultimately 27% was accepted. So, in that sense, the Mandal Commission, its recommendations paved the way for a kind of a social empowerment and social mobility for the OBC communities. As I said, these OBC communities lacked access to land and other assets. The only source of social, what you call mobility, was through education and employment. And as I said, for centuries, these communities were deprived of the advantages of the formal education, and the institutions of learning, education institutions, whether it is the Gurukulas, were not allowed access to these communities. And therefore, in a way, Jyotiba Phule perhaps was quite right in appreciating the colonial efforts at educational reforms. The Hunter Commission report and the dispenses or the evidence that was provided to the Hunter Commission by Jyotiba Phule, etc., shows the importance of formal education, literacy, as a tool of emancipation. That was sought to be implemented and by these social reformers. In that sense, Jyotiba Phule was the foremost social reformer of the empowerment of the OBCs, the educational empowerment, empowerment to access to employment opportunities. Given the peaceful rule, as you all know, how in the Marathwada region the entrenchment of the Brahmins was so strong, and therefore the non-Brahmin movement has come about, and certain social reform-minded rulers like the Kolhapur Maharaja, were the forerunners of these educational empowerment and social upliftment of the Dalit Bhojin communities through education. And therefore, the reservation policy that was enshrined in the constitution. In fact, the reservations for the OBCs, in fact, as I said, goes back to the 19th century in Pule's, document to the Hunter Commission. And but he was perhaps the foremost social reformers who talked about the social reform in terms of loosening the hold of the caste and the rigidity of the caste system to be broken for the upliftment of the Dalit Bhojin communities. And therefore, he was in a way the forerunner of the reservation policy, so to speak. So the Mandal Commission has embodied these historical injustices, and it has quite reasonably and logically argued, for the implementation of the reservation policies for the OBCs, because the OBCs were somehow left out in all these legislative enactments. Of course, the foremost was the Roundtable Conference and the Pune Pact, which in fact sowed the seeds of reservation in favor of certain castes and communities. And that legacy, in fact, was continued through the Mandal Commission recommendations. And the reservation policy was enshrined, though the Indian Constitution provided opportunities for access to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Their reservations were well enshrined in the Constitution. It is due to the efforts of the Mandal and the Mandal Commission. The OBC reservation has become a reality, and this I consider as a very important step towards the social mobility of this heterogeneous group called the OBCs. Many people, like me, for example, the first generation OBCs, coming from the rural background with a deprived social position, belonging to the artisan community, having access to higher education, and ultimately employment opportunities, clearly shows how the Mandal Commission's recommendations of reservations in favor of the OBCs has gone a long way in their emancipation. Generations of OBCs are in fact very much indebted to the Mandal Commission, in spite of the opposition that it faced, in spite of the negation of the principles of reservation and democratization of civil society. The OBCs as a community consisting of heterogeneous sects, castes and communities, castes, have broadly created a kind of an identity. In a broader sense, the identity of the OBC placed, between the upper caste Brahmins and the lower caste Dalits. The middle level, OBCs have acquired a kind of a social status, have become conscious of their status, and a sort of an identity was formed due to the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. I think without the recommendation of the Mandal Commission, perhaps this identity of the OBC, with all its internal differentiation with hierarchies, it was not possible. Only because Mandal Commission has provided a kind of a policy framework, and rationale for the reservation. Because the intensity of the Mandal Commission recommendations could be better understood. The way the opposition from the upper caste was articulated,
Sir,
during the anti-Mandal.
can we conclude in 5 minutes?
Yes, I'm just coming to that. So therefore, coming to these recommendations, therefore, a sort of a policy framework as well as a socially conscious identity was formed due to the Mandal Commission, and Mandal Commission recommendations are a kind of guiding principles for the social empowerment of the other battle. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you very much, Malapalli.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think your elaborate,
sure,
elaborate discussion and elaborate this thing. But another thing I want to share one thing. The Mandal Commission, I think, based on the Constitution, Article 340. In the Mandal Commission report, the chapter first, the commission said the first backward class commission was set up by President order under Article 340 of the Constitution of India on January 29th, 1953, and is submitted its report to the March 30th, 1955, the composition, so and so like that. But this Mandal Commission, basically Kalekar Commission, whatever commissions, this thing is based on the Article 340. That is the most important thing because I want to mention compensate your discussion because so many people they didn't know what is what was the issues in Constituent Assembly. So many people are unaware of what Ambedkar did about OBC. I think his vision, his view in future. He mentioned Article 340. I will read in 1 minute.
Yeah, please, Malapalli. Yeah, that's very important.
The president may by order appoint commission consisting of such persons as the thinks fit to investigate conditions of socially and educationally backward classes within the territory of India and the difficulties under which they labor, and to make recommendations as to the steps that should be taken by the union or any state to remove such difficulties and to improve their condition, and as to the grants that should be made for the purpose by the union or by any state, and the conditions subject to which such grants should be made, and I'd order appointing such commission shall define the procedure to be followed by the Constitution. Then 2, Article 340, Clause 2, a commission so appointed shall investigate the matters referred to them and present to the President a report setting out the facts as found by them and making such recommendations as they think proper. 3rd clause, the President shall cause a copy of the report so presented together with the memorandum explaining the action taken thereon to be laid before the House of Parliament. Sir, this is the very, very important article and clauses because if there is no Article 340, there is no power to make a investigate or make a such acts. No, not anyway. If they want a government, they can do another article should include in the Constitution. But Ambedkar, I think in those days, his fight is different. Instead of that, he mentioned this article to put forward to the future. That's why now OBC communities, they got, because I am SC, because I am BC, I am not talking like that. But objective situation was that Ambedkar was a foresee to the situation which some people should take in future. I think this is the most important issue about OBC. Because you are elaborate Mandal Commission, then historical perspective. But this is also I thought to what is the accommodate I'm enriching your
yes, Malapalli. Yeah, it's a good. it's a good addition that you mentioned about
deliberations.
Article 340 and the
Thank
role
you,
of
sir.
Ambedkar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malapalli, for giving me this opportunity.
Anybody who wants to have a discussion, questions, our beloved Professor Adapa Garu, please, please take a view.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
I am asking the hello. Anybody is there too? Any questions?
No question, sir.
Good.
No questions.
Right.
I think we would have enriched by our professor.
No. I'm completely convinced, and the historical background and perspective what she described and elaborated, that is really very much interesting. And we came to know many more things which are left out from our own memories. And that Kaka Kalikar report, and then after Mandal Commission report, the journey started from Kaka Kalikar to
Yes,
Mandal.
yes.
That is very much interesting, and it is this basically giving the deep information. So thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I'm honored. Thank you, Malapalli.
That is the Arun Kote from Lucknow.
Sir.
He is a senior journalist and activist.
Yeah, I'm honored. Okay.
He runs a website of atrocities of Dalits.
Okay.
He collected 20 years atrocities in his
okay. Very committed scholar.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Malapalli, that's good. I'm honored.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anybody is there? Okay, sir. I think everybody is satisfied, and I think it's a very good thing. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I think we are going to have all lectures into publication, sir.
Good.
I think you have to write whatever you said. I
No,
think
sure.
you should incorporate this Article 340 and Ambedkar contribution also.
Yes.
I hope.
I will do it, Malapalli. Sure.
Then thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks to all. Thanks to all.